A broadside is a really old technology. At its most basic, it's any sheet of paper printed on one side. And it used to be a way of disseminating information publicly, but it's become a fine art form. And in particular, a way to bring together poetry and visual art as a synergistic whole. Broadsided Press is a monthly publication. We're at broadsidedpress.org. And we publish original collaborations between writers and visual artists. We've published some amazing writers and visual artists. And in that time, we've been really amazed by not only the work that has been created, but also in the insights that writers and artists have discovered and shared about their own creative process. We've dreamed of being able to offer workshops for a long time because what we see as editors is so exciting at Broadsided Press. When the Fine Arts Work Center agreed to offer this series of workshops, we leapt at it. And to bring in Alexandra Teague, who's an amazing poet and teacher and editor at Broadsided, to be able to bring in Millian Pham, who's an amazing artist and teacher and our art editor at Broadsided Press, and to have both of them guide and play off of one another with their individual classes focused on poetry and visual art just seemed like a dream situation. To bring a class out into those spaces and to think about how we might bring the poems and the art that Alexandra's students and Millian's students create in response to each other out into the world in innovative ways is really, really exciting. You know, Provincetown is a small enough space that you can see where things are going, and yet it has corners and nooks and crannies that are kind of private. And I think that we will really be able to make something innovative, exciting, and generous to the community as well, to be honest.
One of the things that I love about Broadsided, and one of the reasons that I've stayed as an editor for more than 10 years now, is that we really think about the collaboration, which is not done in real time, between the artist and the writer, as being this really fascinating opportunity for the artist to make a piece of art that isn't trying to illustrate what's in the writing, but is spinning off from it and responding in some way. So it becomes this really interesting conversation between the two forms, and allows the writer to see their own work differently, and allows the artist inspiration and a different direction to go and to pull certain things out of the words. So I think that's one of the most magical things about that. I am personally, as a poet, very inspired by visual art and have done a lot of writing about it. And I've also done a lot of interdisciplinary collaborations with visual artists and also with dancers and musicians. But the opportunity here to be working more intensively in adjoining spaces and really having the artists responding, you know, the next day, later the same day, to work that the poets are doing, and vice versa, is a really amazing, fantastic opportunity. And I've never gotten to do anything exactly like that before.
Being able to have a fresh jumpstart into a studio practice that may be needing a little bit of fresh perspective in this collaborative process is very valuable. And so I'm happy to bring in more than 12 years of collaboration and transdisciplinary experience that bridge the visual arts with science, music, writing, and the public, and in this particular case with poetry. And I love sharing the sort of tools and tricks to create an equitable collaboration between art and poetry. My course uses writing and poetry as generative prompts for visual art making. So if you as a student have been feeling slow or stagnant in the studio, or if you're just looking for something new, this course is for you. In this class, we will collaborate in a community of artists and writers, injecting fresh content and perspective with your individual interests and focus. So it's all about making artworks that bridge your perspective with others in a fine balance between individual and collaborative interests.
My workshop will start by thinking about the medium of the English language itself. There's this wonderful article by James Longenbach called The Medium of the English Language, in which he talks about English coming from both Latinate and Germanic roots, and the ways in which that influences the sort of textures and materiality of the language that we speak and its sounds. And so that may seem, starting with kind of sound, may seem strange for a workshop that's in conversation with visual art, but really we're going to start thinking about the materiality of our language itself and how that can be used both to respond to pieces of visual art that Millian students are making in that workshop, but also how it can be used to pick up on certain artistic techniques that happen in visual art. What is it like to make a painterly poem, for instance? What if you've got a piece of art that's using very heavy brush strokes? What does that sound like in a poem, or how might that happen at the level of lineation, or at the level of repetition? Or what if we want to make a more sculptural poem? So we'll be thinking a lot about the materiality of language in relation to various techniques, which is again why this collaboration is so exciting, that we'll have the chance for the students to be able to talk to each other through their artwork and talk to one another directly and learn something about one another's processes and how they might approach their own art forms. So in terms of the poetry that they'll be writing, the students will be writing poems that are inspired by pieces of visual art that are being made in real time. They'll be writing poems that are inspired by these sorts of conversations about how other poets have approached pieces of visual art and thought about the materiality of language. There will be a lot of opportunity for prompts that I will give them that will be really generative and allow exploration. So I'm really inviting all levels of writers. This is a fantastic workshop as well for somebody who is mostly a visual artist. I've worked with a lot of visual artists before in these kinds of classes, and they can get so much out of kind of turning their usual way of thinking and approaching visual work through language instead. So there's no presupposition that anybody has worked before with, in response to visual art, or even that much with poetry. We're going to be exploring together, and students will come out with quite a few new poems from the week. And I hope a lot more perspective on how they can draw from other art forms to continue to inspire their practice.
In the broadside making workshop, we're going to approach from a bunch of different avenues. There are so many books that are coming out right now because of the new technology that's out there, enabling more sophisticated printing techniques at more affordable prices, from, for example, Robin Coste-Lewis's newest book, to works by Claudia Rankin, Matea Harvey, Victoria Chang. The list goes on. There are a lot of books out there that are combining visual and literary art. And I want us to do a little bit of a reading group for our own inspiration, whether we're inspired as writers or inspired as visual artists, and to talk about what is the opportunity when these two things are coexisting, when one doesn't have to rely on explaining the other when the other isn't also present. What happens there? What happens at Broadsided Press with that dance between the visual and literary? So we're going to be looking at conceptually, emotionally, and even in just terms of graphic presentation, how do we honor that dynamic between the visual and the literary, so that neither one is privileged, so that both are given their own voice and also singing alongside and with one another. So we'll be reading a lot, we'll be playing around with cutting up paper and artwork and magazines and poems and moving things around. We'll be going out into the field and doing more happening style experimentations with the visual and the literary. And we'll be spying on what is happening in Alexandra's class and in Millian's class, and bringing some of those together and talking about how can we bring those together in a unified experience as makers, designers, the third part of this tripod, which is creating a fully realized art literary experience. It takes design as well as the initial creative spark.
My workshop is built for artists of all levels, beginners and advanced artists. Students can expect to come away from this workshop with new tools and abilities in terms of collaborative skills how to ensure that a collaboration is equitable for all parties. What are these considerations? And as a visual artist, how to ensure that visual art doesn't just illustrate the material, but rather generates more idea or conveys a deeper sense of something more. People will come out of this workshop with these collaborative skills, and then also, individual artworks that is targeting the interests of each person, as well as the themes that we're working with.
I'll add that for Millian's workshop, if you go to broadsidedpress.org, you can see some of the work that she's made in response to writing. Most recently, the February 2023 broadside titled "When My Therapist Tells Me My Depression Must Help My Writing," which I think wins for my all-time favorite title. And the way that her visual response to that poem is so creative and so deepening. And then also in 2022, we offered a cyanotype of Millian's to readers, and they sent in so many amazing literary responses to her beautiful image. You can look at some of the examples of the work that Millian has participated in, inspired, and created through Broadsided Press. It's a really new way, I think, of opening process and being both an individual artist and a responsive, responsible, engaged collaborator.
Students can come away from this workshop with inspiration for further writing, new perspective on the medium of language and poetry itself and the possibilities. And I hope a lot of energy to want to keep writing and thinking about these subjects. And they can also really come away, like both Millian and Liz have spoken to, with some other understanding of collaboration, which I think as artists is often the most terrifying and humbling thing that we do, but also one of the most amazing things we can do to get to know our own work. People sometimes are worried that collaborating is going to take, or being given a prompt, or being, asked to move in some direction is going to take away their authentic voice in some way. But I actually think that is the best path to finding your own voice, because in the conversations with other artists, in a better understanding of your own medium, a better understanding of the possibilities for what you can do, you get the best sense of what you personally want to do and why, and the stakes kind of raise on that. And having to articulate what you think a poem is to an artist who is working on a watercolor on a similar subject, or maybe in response to your poem or something, is just also a really humbling, generative, important experience as a creative person.
One of the scariest thing that Alexandra mentioned about collaboration is this loss of personal investment and vision. It doesn't have to be this way. This can be a very liberating experience. And this is why I've continued to do collaborations in addition to making my own individual artwork, is that through collaboration, even though I may not have full control over the topical or thematic interests of the particular work that I'm working on, I can look through this as a way to be very creative in the technical application and also the compositional or aesthetic choices that I choose, as a way to broaden my tool set in that regard. So it is a way to innovate in the way that I approach an artwork, and in the way that I craft an artwork, rather than in the topic and the message that I dive deeper into. Although that is a possibility, I have been able to create many lovely, deep artwork through Broadsided Press. The most recent one that Liz mentioned was from having this very tough parameter that I resonated so well, and it was very hard for me to basically step back and not illustrate it. But that process challenged me to think about really what does the art what does the art need? What do I need? What does the poem need? What does the final broadside need? And that consideration made me grow in a way that I didn't think about before. I grew thematically as well through the process of using someone else's topical interest or thematic interest and then merging it with my own. So part of my workshop too is tackling visual strategies and approaches that help with this collaboration between visual art and writing and poetry.
I really care about how stuff looks on the page. And in the hybrid work that I've done personally, whether it's the Haibun of Toward Antarctica that uses my photographs and my writing to explore my work as a guide in Antarctica, or the collaboration I did with the visual artist Antonia Contro titled Theorem that uses her visual art and my writing, the design of those books was as important as the content to me, because the design was the content. The way that the words and images were sitting aside one another, were interacting with each other, they were part of the meaning of those books. They are part of the meaning of those books. And I feel that's true of the broadsides that we publish. So in my workshop, I hope that students will go away with a huge list of things to read, investigate, look at, explore, from William Blake's crazy collaborative, self-collaborative broadsides to the work of Dwayne Michaels, primarily a photographer who used a lot of text with his writing, to the poets I mentioned earlier, Victoria Chang, Terrence Hayes, Claudia Rankin, who are using visual art along with their writing. Um, and really viscerally experiencing and facilitating the synergy between those mediums. Because when I work with a design mindset honoring both writing and art, it inspires me creatively, and it also really feels like a generous act that also becomes generative. And it's deeply satisfying. It's really thrilling to have people trust me with these materials, whether it's myself or someone else, and then to be able to help it come into a new vision. So I just hope to open that experience to students in the workshop, whether they have any design experience or not, whether they come as writers or they come as visual artists or they come as graphic designers who want to play a little less commercially with the skills they have in that realm as well.
So we will begin this art workshop each day by first doing a warm-up, and the warm-up deals with a litany of words or adjectives that could be found in poems that is generated from Alexandra's workshop, and also from each individual artist's own list of interests and adjectives that they come up with. So from this litany, we will create a sort of very quick investigation in terms of some formal strategies and some other visual strategies that kind of target at bringing to life each of these words or combination of words, and then seeing if that result is a new life. Right, it's not just an illustration, but it's something new. After a series of warm-up exercises, we will launch into discussion about our goals for the day, our individual goals and collaborative goals. And then the rest of class time would be working on our individual investigation with discussions with myself and with the other teachers in the workshop and with each other.
Yeah, I'm imagining that the workshop will start by looking at some examples of other writers writing in response to various forms of visual art. Tracy K. Smith's wonderful poem Unrest in Baton Rouge in response to the fairly recent photograph. We will look at poems that approach a variety of different styles and medium of visual art, and then we'll use that to start getting some pieces of art from Millian students that then the students can work in response to thinking really expansively again about what response means. Does that mean playing off of some element of the style? Does it mean playing off some element of the content of that piece? Does it mean imagining a story around something that currently looks very abstract? And then one of the beautiful things about having the artists in another room later in the day is that it will be possible for the writers and artists to also actually talk to each other about these subjects and about how they feel about these responses. And also for us to play kinds of games of telephone, I'm imagining, throughout the week, so that the artists will make something and the poets will make something and then give that back to the artists who might make something else in response to that. And we will continue to kind of tendril off in different directions with that. But again, I mean, I think one of the things that often when people are first thinking about ekphrastic work or work in response to visual art is that they imagine that that is going to be an illustration or some kind of description of the piece of art, but the piece of art already exists. It's already doing the visual work. And so the possibilities for, again, imagining stories or picking up one bit of the image and highlighting it. There's the Sylvia Plath poem, Two Views of the Cadaver Room, that's off of, I believe, a Bruegel painting that takes one tiny, tiny part of this huge canvas and zeroes in on it and just tells the story of those two figures there. So again, thinking about all of the different ways that the poetry and the art can be in relation to one another is going to be part of the fun of the week. And I think that there will be the individual students are going to choose different aspects of that are most exciting to them to pursue. So I will come in with a lot of poems to read, a lot of materials and plans, and a lot of inspiration, but much of it is also going to evolve, as any good collaboration should, as we kind of develop between the two workshops some key questions and kind of preoccupations in what has been happening and how that communication is going back and forth.
Yeah, and I think for the design aspect, I think I'm hoping, and we'll have to talk about this, but I'm hoping to be a fly on the wall at least a little bit of the time in both of your workshops, and to take advantage of the opportunity to witness as designers work unfolding. And maybe it ends up that a piece one of Millian's students has created resonates with a piece that one of Alexandra's students has written that weren't originally in conversation with each other. What are the opportunities of finding resonance that wasn't planned? And how can we create that introduction? And how can we also then turn that back to the artist and the writer and have them think about why that spark was created too? So I'm hoping to do a lot of really synergistic work. I'm hoping to look at a lot of examples, to play around, to make a big mess. And as Alexandra said, to co-create with the students in the class how we might end up at the end with something that we might want to show someone outside of our own classroom. I think it would be really fun to end up with a folio of work that we're ready to show other folks who are there at the work center, people in the community, that we're ready to introduce to them and release into the world, and maybe just ephemerally, but to feel like there's kind of a culminating bouquet, assemblage, folio of collaborations that can really highlight that dynamism between the two mediums, and with that third leg of the tripod, which is the bringing together, the deliberate design of those into a singular piece.
I think one of the exciting things about this is, like Liz is saying, there are going to be various pieces of art of various types made by the end of this. And there's a possibility that those could go on not only for displays at the Fine Arts Work Center as part of this week, but also might have other lives as broadsides or for projects in the future. And the people also might discover collaborators that they want to continue working with.
So glad you said that, Alexandra, because I meant to say that as well, that I think one of the things I hope students will come away with is community. So much of the work that we do as artists and writers is solitary, and the spark of having a co-conspirator, even more than a collaborator, can be really, really fun. We've seen artists and writers come together over the years to continue to do a lot of work together. For example, Cheryl Gross and Nacelle Davis, they've done multiple collaborations now since their first introduction through Broadsided.
My third book of poetry, or what we'll call Desire, wouldn't have come about if I hadn't been in an interdisciplinary arts collaborative called the Bass Collective with Stacey Eisenbarger and with a pianist and a dancer. And it was actually the questions that we were asking about women in the arts through a year-long collaboration that led me to the first poems that eventually, into a whole character named Ophelia, who I write about in there, came right out of that collaboration. And so I've seen this as well, that something that I think I'm doing as a sort of one-off collaboration then becomes very central to my own work and thinking for years afterwards.
This is one of the super exciting thing to me about these workshops is that, you know, we're building a community of very willing collaborators, and that is very difficult to find on our own. And so, you know, a huge part of my workshop is to ensure that these collaborations are fruitful, especially for visual artists. And so I will send out a survey to all participants to figure out what are the strategies that they're interested in, what are the sort of collaborations that they have experienced with and that they wish to learn more about. And in that way, we can be more strategic about the content that is being delivered and tailoring the collaborative experience that works for multiple constituents. So this is very exciting to find out what people are really wanting out of this experience.
Honestly, we're going to have so much fun.
Yes.
I kept wanting to say too, yeah, the word fun needs to come up more and just play. I mean, I think writing is an immense amount of work, and I draft and redraft and redraft, and I spend so many hours at it, but at its best, it's also very playful, and it expands my possibilities of thinking about what's possible for language or myself or my own thoughts, and it surprises me, you know. And again, I think collaborations just push all of those wonderful elements of solitary work even further, and it can be even more fun to have other voices involved. So it's going to be very, very fun.
I know, as an editor with Broadsided since it started in 2005, the magic that happens when we discover that spark between writing and art, and to have an opportunity to share that in real time and create it in real time is, I can't wait. It's going to be amazing.
It's so accessible as a broadside too. Anybody can download it and print it. It really resonates with me. And in terms of thinking about the sort of strategies and ways of approaching collaboration, you know, it's open. It's so open and it's so playful. There's purpose in it, and there's so much potential.
One of the things I love about Broadsided is that the broadsides go out of books and out of classrooms and out of the spaces that we sometimes relegate poetry to in our society, and into bus stops and bulletin boards in hallways, and, you know, by the water fountain where somebody's going to be standing for a minute and they have a chance to experience some art, and it's often the visual art that probably draws their eyes to the broadside, and then they start to read, and even if they read just a fragment of the language and it has some effect for them, I think that that's so wonderful. People who tell me that they don't like poetry, I always say that's like not liking food or something. Like, there are so many different styles of poetry that it's just the person hasn't found the style of poetry they like yet, because that's just, it's basically impossible to not like some poem. And I think that Broadsided and having the broadside so accessible, like Millian was saying, just ups the chances that somebody encounters a fragment of language, an image or something, and that they just think of that as part of their everyday life, rather than this thing that you've got to go to the art museum, you've got to go to the poetry book. I love that. And again, having a chance to have a workshop where people are making, really responsibly making poems and pieces of art for broadsides in real time is just an incredible opportunity. This is an example of
Oh, I love that one.
one style of broadside. They're so varied is one of the wonderful things. And again, we never know what we're going to end up with because we're choosing poems, and then what the artist runs with that and does is so incredibly varied in terms of the style of art, in terms of we've got, sometimes sculptural pieces. This was an instance of the switcheroo where we had the sculpture first and then poets sent in text after that in response to it. And this is a rare situation. Again, we put together this anthology after 15 years of Broadsided being only online and only then, like online and then downloadable and posted all over. The anthology also has pictures of the broadsides showing up all over the world.
Millian has chosen a piece of visual art for this year's switcheroo, which is when we post a piece of visual art and ask writers to respond. And that will be live at Broadsided through the month of March and into the first bit of April. And we welcome folks to start responding now, start playing now. And you can see other examples of such pieces at the website. And that might give you a sense of what happens at Broadsided, as do the interviews that we publish each month between the writer and the visual artist. In March, we'll be releasing our first live audio file podcast of a conversation between a writer and a visual artist that kind of opens up that conversation a little bit. But what's behind those interviews really illuminates what we're hoping to bring into the workshop: the excitement, the discovery, the challenge of being vulnerable with someone else with your own creative work and process.